Welcome to another episode of the Mapscaping podcast. My name is Daniel, and this is a podcast for the geospatial community. This episode is sponsored by the Cloud Native Geospatial Forum. C&G Forum 2026 runs October 6th to the 9th at Snowbird, Utah. 3.5 days with people building and deploying cloud native geospatial tech, Stack, Cogs, GeoParquet, ZAR, and the tools and workflows that make them work at scale. The agenda is built around real-world practice, what's working, what's not, and what's next, plus a hands-on workshop day on the 6th to kick things off. Register at 2026.cloudnativegeo.org. So if this episode is the kind of thing that you nerd out about, the Cloud Native Geospatial Forum is definitely for you. Okay, on to today's guest. I'm joined today by Ian Schuler, the CEO of Development Seed. Now, Development Seed is a name a lot of you will know. These folks are behind a lot of the open source tooling that quietly holds up the geospatial world, and Ian has been steering the ship for over a decade. Today, we're going to be talking about something Ian refers to as the Great Retooling. This is the idea that we are on the edge of a massive shift where cloud native geospatial stops being an emerging pattern and becomes the dominant one. A big part of what's driving that is AI. Agents want to discover your data, query it, transform it, and hand back an answer. And as Ian puts it, if your data isn't available to those agents, you are simply not part of the conversation. So I personally really enjoyed chatting with Ian, and I really hope you enjoy this conversation. Ian Schuler, welcome to the podcast. It's an absolute pleasure to have you on. We've met once or twice before, I think, in real life. And I've always wanted to have you on the podcast as a guest, so this is awesome. You're the CEO of DevSeed, Development Seed, and I wonder if we could start there. Perhaps you could just take the time to introduce yourself, put a few more words around the extremely short introduction I've just given, and tell us a little bit about DevSeed. What has your involvement been? What is DevSeed up to these days?
Sounds great. Yeah, very excited to finally get on the podcast and have a great conversation here. I'm the CEO of Development Seed, Ian Schuler, CEO of Development Seed. I've been running Development Seed now for about 12 years. DevSeed's actually existed for quite some time before that. It was created in 2003 by 3 grad students who were in Ayacucho, Peru, Eric Gunderson, Bonnie Bogle, and Ian Ward. And they were seeing this moment where the idea that the future is here, it's just not evenly distributed. Being in rural Peru, the technology wasn't being used in the way that they thought was possible. And so they started an organization that really focused on development organizations, governments, the public institutions that are critical to society working, helping them catch up with where things are in technology and data. And that was really the thread through the first decade of Development Seed, constantly chasing this point of where can we have more value and making data available and making it useful. So that group ended up building a tool called Mapbox, which I was sort of involved in from the outside as a client of Development Seed in those days. And Mapbox spun out as a separate organization in 2013. I took over Development Seed at that point and just continued on this journey. And again, has led us into geospatial and Earth observation data is really the area where we saw the biggest potential, the biggest delta between the value of information and data and the actual application to help solve problems and make the planet and societies and communities better.
So just to be clear, DevSeed didn't start off as having a geospatial focus.
That's right.
So I know DevSeed today as a quote-unquote geospatial company.
That's correct.
But you grew into that.
That's right. Yep.
Interesting. If you could go back in time, would you make the same choices? Would you still choose geospatial or would you choose something else?
Yeah, no, I think so. And I mean, geospatial, like I said, it's that area where the data about the Earth and the populations on Earth is pretty much the most important information out there. But it's also, from a technology standpoint, it's been a really exciting place to be involved in, this transition to the cloud and then the growth of AI, both in the understanding and computer vision side and now in the LLMs and how do we work with and process data. I mean, there's just so many different you get to send things into space, the small set revolution. There's so many really exciting and interesting areas and problems to be solved. It is constantly reinventing. And I think one of the unique things about Development Seed is we've always been an open source shop, right? So as we're building things, we're kind of putting ourselves out of business, right? We're building a thing, and by the sixth or seventh time we build it, hopefully we build it in a way that you don't need DevSeed anymore in order to solve that problem. And that really forces us to continue to think about what's next and what's the next set of problems that we can help knock down and make a bit easier. And so that's also those two things together, both the open source side and being part of a really dynamic community in geospatial, has just made it a wild ride. And I wouldn't have chosen anything else.
So the listeners, of course, cannot see the expression on your face when you're talking that. But I've got to tell you, listeners, this man believes that. Like, you believe that, right?
You're not going to try to talk me out of it, are you?
No. But I can see that you're genuinely excited about this space. Like, it's pretty cool after a relatively long period of time. And my guess is it's not always easy selling services, especially the kind of services you're selling. And you are constantly trying to put yourself out of business. There is no room. It's not just invent once and then sit back and protect the moat, right?
That's right.
You're constantly reinventing yourself. At least that's what I hear you say.
Yeah. And honestly, I think it's just more fun. Like, what it has given me is the ability to work with some of the most talented people that I'll ever work with, right? That challenge draws really smart people. And yeah, again, I wouldn't have done it any other way.
We talked a lot about technology, all the different things that have happened, the way technology is evolving. And I remember in our first conversation, you talked about this idea that you have, like a phrase that you kept repeating was the Great Retooling of technology. And it sounds like you're retooling often if you're constantly trying to stay on the edge of things. So this podcast episode we're doing is sponsored by the Cloud Native Geospatial Forum. And we're going to be talking a lot about cloud native geospatial infrastructure here. And so I want to start with that as well. So describe, when you say the Great Retooling, what is it that you mean, and how does that relate to cloud native geospatial?
This is a perfect encapsulation of what we've just been talking about, right? Like, the Great Retooling is sort of an internal term that we've been using to refer to what we believe will be a massive shift in the tools that people are using in working with geospatial data that'll play out over the next couple of years. And there are really kind of two components of it. First is the shift of cloud native geospatial from being an emerging pattern to one of being the dominant pattern for managing and distributing data. And then the second shift is the increasing adoption of AI or agentic or some sort of intelligent tooling for understanding, parsing, discovering, visualizing, and working with that data. And it's really that second part that is going to drive the velocity of the first part, right? People are going to start to shift to cloud native geospatial as their underlying infrastructure because they need to in order to take advantage of this rapidly developing set of capabilities on the AI and agentic side. And I think we will quickly find ourselves in a place where that mode of accessing information becomes so dominant that if your data isn't available to agents, it just won't be part of the equation anymore. It won't be part of the conversation. And so that will kind of flip the switch, as happens often in technology, where all of a sudden you get to a tipping point where an emerging pattern becomes the dominant pattern. I think the interesting part here is that we think that this is going to be a fairly quick switch, right? That the advancement in capabilities and some of the value that we're seeing on the AI side is going to lead to a really rapid shift of infrastructure and of tooling within the course of a couple of years rather than a decade, right? And so we think it's hard to say for sure, but we're looking at, really like 2 years being over that period. A lot of organizations that were just kind of looking at cloud native geospatial before having to really seriously think about how they start to adopt these tools and patterns.
Do you envision the technology behind cloud native geospatial? Like, when I think of it, I think of file formats and standards.
Yep.
Do you think that is that ready for the shift, or is that mature enough now to handle the shift that's coming? Or is there a lot of work needing to be done in the next couple of years?
Yeah. I mean, it is still a very dynamic place. I think even in the last few years, we've seen more different types of standards emerge. We've seen more advanced ways of working with data. Yeah, like very big, messy, multidimensional data, or working with data in a traditional format, but kind of treating it like it's cloud native. So I think we're continuing to develop new patterns. But what I think the known is, I think we don't know which AI tools will win, but I think we have a pretty good idea of how they'll want to consume data. And at the core, that is, they'll want to be able to look over large masses of data. They'll want to be able to do that in a very efficient way. They'll want to be able to grab just the bits of information that are interesting to them. They'll want to be able to transform that data without a lot of overhead to look at patches and transform those into embeddings so that they can look for similarities. Those sorts of types of actions that AI is going to want to take on data are fairly predictable at this point. And at this moment, the cloud native data formats are the best available approach for accomplishing those goals. And I think that will only continue to be the case.
Yeah, I agree. It's like we don't know exactly what shape these agents are going to take, but we know, like you say, the actions they're going to want to do. I think they'll be more and more clear as we move through the next couple of years. But in general terms, it makes a lot of sense what you're saying. Could you describe a cloud native stack for me, please?
Yeah. So in the most simple terms, I think like for the layman, not the engineer, right? I think the most simple terms, like a cloud native stack is one that is built for machines as the primary user rather than humans as the primary user, right? Like in the olden days, we had people who were working on files on computers, on their own computers, and humans would access this information. They might subset them and give them to someone else, but there's usually a human involved. And cloud native formats are essentially taking that data and putting it in a way that performs really, really well when you have a lot of computers all in one space, right? Essentially, the commercial cloud. So it is blob storage, or essentially buckets of data with very light organization over them, but indexed in a way that it's easy for an API call or for sort of like a computer call to be able to find the right information and to be able to find hopefully the smallest amount of information necessary to answer its question. And so you're not thinking about things necessarily in terms of files, although there are some COGS, for instance, are file-based cloud native geospatial formats, but you're thinking about it in terms of big sets of data.
And just to be clear, like finding just the bits of information that the computer wants to access, that the agent wants to access, is this range requests?
Yeah.
Is this what we're talking about?
Largely the method through which we're doing that. Yep, for sure.
Yeah. For me, this is one of the magical things about cloud native is I just get that piece of information. You just want one pixel. Here is, maybe not one pixel, but at least the 10 that are surrounding it, as opposed to here, download this 30 gigabyte GeoTIFF.
And then unpack it. And then download this tarball, unpack it, get just the bands that you're interested in, then compile, right? And so, I mean, that's nice from the engineer's standpoint, right? Because now I don't have to work with as much data. Now I can bring my analysis to these massive amounts of data and do analysis over a much larger amount of data than I've ever worked at before. But for us, like what was most interesting is the access patterns that had opened up that weren't possible previously, right? Now I can build an app on top of this data. I can build a precision ag app. And when somebody goes to look at their field, it's good in the speed that people expect things to work on the web, just give them the information that they're looking for and not have to go download and unpack a whole bunch of files and pull out just the bits that they needed. And so suddenly it opens up use cases that weren't possible previously, ways of communicating information to users that wouldn't have otherwise had access to it, business cases that weren't possible previously. And all of that, I think, is actually the exciting downstream effects of moving to cloud native formats.
Do you have any interesting examples of those business cases or use cases that weren't possible, or perhaps an example of someone moving from a traditional stack over to cloud native and what that meant for them and the decisions people make along the way?
Yeah.
Like it would be really cool to have some stories around some of these things, if it's possible.
Yeah, on the business case side, I think you can kind of point at any of these ag apps that have developed that allow users to look at their farming data and pull Sentinel data or other sort of predicted yield data or anything, and even a derived data set. It needs to be organized in a way that allows a user to be able to look at a very specific place on Earth and quickly get the information that they're looking for. Even modern weather apps, right? Some of the new weather apps wouldn't be possible with these sorts of formats. I think one of the areas that was fun for me in seeing how these patterns change behavior was in some of the work we're doing with NASA around biomass data for researchers and trying to, there's a project called MAP that we've been supporting out the Office for Data Science Initiatives, ODSI at NASA has been supporting for years now, or that NASA's been working on for years. We're one of the teams along with JPL that's involved in building that. And the concept behind it is, okay, once we get NISAR, once we get ESA biomass, JEDI is a LiDAR mission. These are some satellite missions that are really good at understanding forests, but the data they produce is massive, right? And so you're not going to download that data onto your computer and do your analysis. It's like one of the domains where you really have to bring your analysis to the data. And so this was a pathfinder in figuring out how do we create tools that allow researchers who are working on biomass estimation to be able to do their work in these cloud workbenches. And the neat thing is, well, now that you have reorganized how these people do their work away from university-based supercomputing clusters or institution-based resources to the cloud, now you've enabled, you can allow collaboration across universities, people who used to be in the same university, and since one of them has gone on somewhere else, can continue to collaborate. One team that has found something can much more easily make that available to another group that wants to build on it or expand on it. And you get towards this point where you get really neat loops of reproducibility and being able to check and build on science. Jed shared an article with me called Data Science at the Continuity, which introduces this term of frictionless reproducibility. And once you have that frictionless reproducibility, it really changes the research in that area and allows some really exciting things to happen. So I think that's an example of the sort of patterns that you can see through very small things like range gets and massive data in a bucket somewhere, right?
Whenever we talk about cloud native geospatial, we always come back to satellite data. Is that just because it's a massive amount of data, or is that because pixels are somehow a better use case for this geospatial cloud native architecture?
I think it is because it is a massive amount of data. It forces you into these patterns sooner, right? Rather than some of the vector data sets. I think there's also really interesting things on the vector data side. I mean, I think there's also a lot of interesting stuff going on, just sort of weather data and other sorts of Earth data that isn't necessarily raster based, right?
I think the Overture Foundation would be one of them.
You're right. I think it's some combination of it being like really sticky and interesting and kind of compelling, but also, yeah, these are big, heavy, messy data sets. And so they lend themselves to new methods.
Yeah, I think the Overture Foundation is probably a good example of vector data in cloud native format, cloud native infrastructure. Thank you very much for highlighting that bit about reproducible research. I thought that was really, really interesting. And also, years ago, I remember the catchphrase being, you take your algorithm to the data.
Yeah.
And now, with cloud native, you can bring your data to the algorithm, which does two things, at least in my mind. The cloud native infrastructure side of it, for the data provider, the burden is lifted somewhat. They have to provide less compute on their side just to host this stuff. I guess there's no big, massive server running in the background doing whatever it was doing. And for the data consumer, their access has increased simply because they don't have to get like 500 gigabytes of data when they just wanted that little small section of it for 10 megabytes to do their research. And then if it's all hosted in one spot, I guess some of this, the idea behind a lot of these repositories is let's have one central source of data instead of like reproducing the data set all over the world. Yeah, and now with cloud native, I did this, you can use exactly the same notebook or algorithm and point at the data set and reproduce it wherever you are for a different area of the world. It's really fascinating.
And can also speed up the pipeline from research to application, right? Because the applications can be built on exactly the same data that the original research was done.
Yeah. What? When you look across the landscape of people using data, like you look out there and pixels makes a lot of sense. Get that. Overture Foundation, good example of a massive data set that's now accessible via this cloud native infrastructure. What use cases is cloud native not going to be right for, at least not right now? And the reason I ask this is I quite often talk with, the GIS analyst who's out working for the local government somewhere.
Yeah.
She hears about cloud native geospatial, has no clue what to do with it.
Yeah.
Doesn't see how it fits into her workflow.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I mean, so there are kind of two things to distinguish here, right? One is the use of the commercial cloud, which has its own cost structures and the benefits and the disadvantages from using it. And then I think separate from that is considering these sort of cloud native formats and standards. So yeah, I think if you have a workflow that's working for you right now and you're producing a thing on a regular basis and you're a county commissioner that's responsible for producing a report every month and you have automated exactly how to do that, then maybe there isn't a lot of benefit for you. I think it's also true that the cloud has real costs. NASA has, I think, something like 180 petabytes of Earth data that's being managed by ISIS at the moment, right? Some of those data sets are going to make sense to move to the cloud. And some of them actually, the cost equation might work out in a different way. And then even within that, for some of those data sets, it's going to make sense to convert them to a native cloud native format. For some of them, they might exist in their archival format, but have some other way of accessing them that looks close enough to cloud native that that'll work, right? And so there is a bit of a question, data set by data set, depending on who your users are and how you intend to use it, where you should host these and what formats make the most sense. That said, I do think that more and more of the tooling that people are going to want to use to access this information is going to expect data to be formatted in lighter, more machine-friendly ways. And so again, I do expect that within the next few years, there will be things out there that would make this county GIS officer's job more easy that may require them to rethink how they're organizing this data, and also will actually make it cheaper, that conversion easier and cheaper than it might have been a year ago or 2 years ago, which are all things that lead into this expectation to see more and more data move into those sorts of formats.
Will be incredibly interesting, at least for me, to start to hear stories about people moving away from GeoServer, ArcGIS Server, not needing that infrastructure running constantly in the background anymore, just to I write a file, I put it over here. And then my job is to quote unquote market that file, tell people where it is, go here, look at that.
That's right. And we're seeing more of that. We've had a number of projects over the last year where they are specifically looking to migrate away from GeoServer or some other sort of approach into a more cloud native approach. It was those insights that kind of got us seeing this as a trend in our work over the last year or so.
So right at the start, you mentioned agentic workflows. You mentioned this is the way models, agents are going to want to look at the data. They're going to want to discover it. They're definitely going to want to do these 3-4 things with it. What those agents exactly look like, we don't know. But I remember from our pre-interview, you had an example of Global Nature Watch, I believe, an agentic interface. Would you mind talking us through that, please?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, we've done about 10 to 12 of these projects now where we've worked with an organization that has massive data sets. World Resources Institute, Land and Carbon Lab at the World Resources Institute is a great example of this. They are constantly producing cutting edge research. They have 80 some data sets and more all the time about the state of the planet, about the state of forests, about the state of water, carbon stock, biodiversity, tons of really rich information about the planet. And there are people who know how to use that and they rely on it very heavily. But the set of people around the world who could benefit from this information is much greater than the number of people who are using it right now because it's hard to work with. It's hard to even know what's available. It's hard to find that information, to find the pieces that you need to process it and to put it in a way that you can understand it. And if you need an expert to do that for you, most decisions that would benefit from this data just won't use it at all. And so the idea from Craig at Land and Carbon Lab was, hey, can we use these new agentic tools to make this data more accessible? And I think the key insight that we've come to across these projects is if you were going to go task a GIS expert to answer the question of what are the drivers of deforestation in around Lisbon, that person would need to think about the question, understand what are the data sets that might exist that would help them to answer that question, go out and see if they can find those, query that data for the time periods and the locations that they're interested in, run some sort of transformation on that, and then visualize that and bring you back a report, right? And many pieces of that can be very easily automated by an LLM, right? They're very good at writing code. They're very good at writing API calls. They're very good at presenting information for visualization. And so you can take elements of that and on the retrieval side, automate that. And the real interesting part is what an LLM is very good at is taking a user's question or user's intent and turning that into math that you can then start to respond to, right? And so the world we were in is you had a dashboard or you had some sort of tool that a user came to and they had to figure out what can I even do here and what data is available. Now you can just have them ask their question and the agents will go out on their behalf, see if the data exists, go find it, get the relevant information, run whatever analysis or transformation they need to do on it, and then figure out what's the best way to present that to a user. Is this best as a map? Is this a change over time? So I want to show a chart or like some sort of graph or some combination, and then display that in not a dashboard, but in an interface that is fit to the user's question and in Bahasa or in Arabic or whatever language they had asked it in. And so it's just incredibly empowering and allowing people to get real answers from these questions. Again, the important thing is you aren't allowing the agent to come up with the answer. You aren't allowing it to hallucinate some imaginary idea of what deforestation in Lisbon is. It's going and actually accessing real data and displaying that data. So it might get it wrong. It might show you Lisbon, Ohio, and you wanted Lisbon, Portugal, but it's going to show you real data. And so that's the important part. And the nice thing is then you can have a conversation with it and say, no, this is what I was looking for. And it will go and fix that for you, right? Which a typical dashboard interface isn't able to do.
And for many years now, people have been on this podcast, especially say, the answer isn't always a map. Sometimes it's something else. Sometimes it's the number 12 or something that's going to fit into the user's workflow. But in this scenario, it could be anything.
Yeah.
You could say, I'd like a map.
Yeah.
You could say, I need I need a quote that I can put in my report.
Yeah.
And that I could reference back to this. And you could show me the workings where I could, back to the idea of reproducible research. It could be anything, right? If we're talking about this agentic interface.
That's right. And I think where this is going is even more interesting is so WRI has built this tool, Global Nature Watch, which has massively expanded the number of people who can start to work with these 80 data sets. But I think where this ends up going is eventually people won't even need to come to Global Nature Watch. They'll just ask Claude or ChatGPT or Gemini, their agent of choice, hey, what's going on with deforestation in my area? And it will know where they are. It will go find the right data. And that's where I think the real compelling part is going to come on the case of data providers is these tools are going to start to look for your data. And if your data is in a format where they can easily access it and work with it, you'll be part of the conversation. And if it's not, then it won't, right? And so Claude will go out and find this data and present it to the user. And maybe that isn't even in a map. Maybe that is, they're adding rows to a column in a spreadsheet that they're working with that is doing some sort of zonal statistic of a data set that you've created. So I think that starts to get really exciting.
What's going to happen to the static dashboard?
Well, the static dashboard was always the worst answer to the question, right? It was the least.
Yes, it was.
It was the least worst option at best, right? I mean, I talked a little bit about my involvement with Development Seed. The first project that I did where I saw the power of a map was in 2008 in Afghanistan when I hired Development Seed. I was the client. I had hired Development Seed to understand what happened in the Afghanistan elections. This was an election that the international community really, really wanted to be a good election because we'd spent all this time building up democracy in Afghanistan. There's reasons to think it might not be. So Development Seed took the election commission's own election results, this 2,000-some page PDF written in Urdu, scraped that data, somehow figured out how to match it with polling station locations, other sorts of demographic information, and essentially created this map that changed the conversation. In a room of people who wanted to say that this was a good election, they just couldn't anymore because of a map. And we had built a tool at that time to make all of this information available. And there were essentially three elements. There was here's where you download the open data for you to do whatever you want with it. There is the stories, like here are the things that we learned from this, and a visualization that demonstrates that interesting information. And then here's a dashboard that you can use to play with the data and switch on some layers and try your own things and answer whatever questions you have. And most people either wanted the data, so they were going to work with it and whatever tools they were used to, or they just wanted to know what happened here. They just wanted to be told what the answer was. They didn't want to play around with a dashboard, right? So the audience for it's fairly limited. And so we spent a lot of time at DevSeed trying not to build dashboards, trying to build like a data product that is around a particular purpose and user who has like a particular set of questions that they want to answer. But sometimes you do, like you have a set of users where you don't know what they're going to ask or how they're going to use it. And you want to make information available. And so you need something, right? And the worst version of this is just, I'm going to vomit a bunch of data on the screen and now it's your problem, right? There are ways to do it better than that. We spent a decade trying to figure out, like, how do you use good visual cues to help people understand what they can do here? How do you use common design patterns or visual language so that once they figured it out in one area, it'll look the same and apply in another area? Like there are things you can do on the design side to make that a less painful experience. And now we have this whole other set of tools that are available that are much better, that are the new least worst option, I suppose, for how to allow people to work with this data, where they don't have to learn your interface. They don't have to learn your taxonomy or your way of organizing things. They can just ask questions and see results.
Yeah. So before we started recording, we were talking about Will Cadell, and he told me once, like, real-time data for some people is just a real-time problem.
Yes. Right.
So unless you do something else with that. And I can see like the idea of that agentic workflow in front of the data, agentic interface. I mean, that solves the real-time problem, I think.
Yeah, I can. And like, I think like anything, I'm sure there'll be ways to mess it up or things where you're not getting exactly what you want. And I think we're all of us who are working with these tools see the duality there. But man, I think it's going to be an exciting time. The last decade has been this exciting exploration of the simple insight of blob storage and range jets, right? And all of the implications of that are still playing out. And the application of LLMs to help in like science communications, essentially in geospatial, is at a nascent point right now. And it's going to take a decade for it to fully play out. And I think the types of ways that people are working with data, and they're going to look very different, may not be chatbotty, right? It might have a very different look and feel. And I'm excited for the decade ahead to figure all this out.
Yeah. So at the start of the conversation, we talked about constantly reinventing yourself, trying to put yourself out of business, essentially. So what does like a geospatial services company look like in 2, 3, 4, 5 years? Like, obviously, you don't know exactly what it's going to look like.
Something
but
I
the
would
direction.
love to know the answer to that. Running a geospatial services company is definitely something that you think about. It keeps you up a little bit. The one thing, I am confident that it will still exist, right? And I'm confident that there will still be a need for this sort of work. I'm also pretty confident that it will look very different. The way the work is done will look very different than it is today. But there will still be really interesting problems to solve. And I think, while there are certain things that will be commodified pretty easily, there's still going to be a need for people who really understand how to work with data, how to connect it to problems, how to deliver the end answer, essentially. Like, that's still going to require really smart humans who are really thoughtful about how to work with and present and organize and display data and information. And so I'm confident that geospatial services of some sort will continue to be around, but beyond that, it's an interesting time for sure. And I think a very exciting one.
Yeah, oftentimes, so when we talk with people in your position, running companies, they're about solving problems and providing solutions. And when they say solving problems, they're talking about, removing friction, making things easier for people. And I've got a quote in here from you, I think, where it says something like, friction never goes away, it just changes shape. So I guess what we're kind of really in the business here is predicting what shape the friction is going to be in 3, 4, 5 years' time. But there is going to be friction. We just don't know the shape of it.
That's right. And I think like one of the advantages of being in services as opposed to being in a big product company or something like that you're seeing a lot of pain points and you're seeing different types of pain points. So as things shift, as the world changes, you get kind of early exposure to where that friction is going to be. And I think that's been a lot of our success as an organization is noticing that friction early enough to then build something like some sort of open tool or open library that hits a nerve for a lot of people and then it becomes part of the stack. And I think that's actually an advantage that you get from a services company that you don't always get from a venture-backed startup, for instance.
I think too, if we compare services to software, to SaaS, just to a product you buy on the internet, there's no connection between me and the makers of the script. So the thing we're using at the moment to record this podcast, I don't know who they are. And frankly, I don't care. I just want it to work. Yeah. But in a services-based company with someone like you, like I have an opportunity to build a relationship with you. I can know, like, and trust you. I can come back to you. You can be my guide in this brand new world. Descript, like if they disappear tomorrow, well, I'll just find something else.
Yeah. And I think the best services companies also care about you, right? They're interested in the problem. They're curious about the problem. They're hopefully we're selecting for clients where we believe in the things they believe in. We believe that what they're doing is important. We want to help them figure out how to be successful. Helping them figure out how to be successful is a more interesting problem than figuring out how to meet a spec or deliver on a PRD, right? So, and exposes you to exactly these sort of friction points we were talking about.
At any point in development seed, did you have to sit down and decide like what a good client looks like for you, like people that you want to work with?
Oh yeah. Yeah, for sure. We've had a few rubrics for like how we determine. Well, one of the maybe deliberate things about DevSeed is we've kept it below the low watermark of quality work, right? So we're usually in a position where we're getting inbound opportunities and we can be fairly selective about what comes in. As anything, it's a bit of a roller coaster, just ups and downs. But we are in a position to be able to say how we want to spend our time. And so we do have developed frameworks on what makes a good partner. For us, it's a combination of like mission alignment. Are they working on things that we believe are aligned with our goals around environment, climate, working in the social good? Are they doing something we're going to learn from technically? Are they doing something that's cutting edge and interesting where we're going to be able to build our own skills? Are we contributing back in some way, some sort of open source or open data set, or improving something that already exists? Do they understand how tech is built, right? Are they trying to get us to do like waterfall or some sort of like terrible way of building technology where we're not going to be able to, build something that's useful and impactful? And then, there's certainly can they afford it, right? Like, are we going to make so much bank on this that we can then go take the proceeds and work on the labs projects that we're excited about, or vice versa? It fits on so many other ways and we're going to find a way to make it work, even though we're probably not going to make anything on this because it helps us and checks all the other boxes.
Yeah, I appreciate you sharing that with us. I hope everyone who's running some sort of business is thinking about that. Like, what client do I actually want? Who do I actually want to work with and why? And I think probably it's a bit of a luxury problem, isn't it? Like being able to pick and choose. At the start, sometimes you just got to go out there and make a ton of mistakes and you just need to survive.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, I think what's worked for me is being opinionated, right? And being open. Have a viewpoint on how we think the world should go and how we think tech should work and contribute some things towards that. And the right people find you, right? Like it really makes it easier to know you're working with the right folks, because if you're being very clear about who you are and what you're about, it's more likely that they're going to find you than if you have to like go knock on a bunch of doors and hope that the one you're knocking on is the right thing.
Yeah. Birds of a feather, right? So this is company. We've been talking about the business side of things. What makes a good employee at the moment for Development Seed? And the reason I'm asking this, here's a bit of context. People are out there. This is a brave new world, not just for geospatial infrastructure, but for the people working with it as well. And there's a lot of people out there scrambling, or at least I hope they're scrambling in their minds to figure out like, well, where is it exactly I'm going to fit into this piece of the puzzle?
Yeah.
So it might be interesting to hear from someone like you who's in the CEO role. Like, what is it exactly that makes a good employee for you? What are you looking for?
Yeah, I'll answer that. I'll kind of try to do both. So I will answer what makes a good employee for Development Seed. I don't think most people are, right? Like I think it's perfectly okay that you're not a good fit for Development Seed. Like, I think we're also have the luxury of being somewhat picky on that front. But there are also people who are amazing people who I love and who wouldn't work at Development Seed, right? So for us, we're looking for people who are a bit impatient about the state of the world and want to make it better, right? Like we talk about, it's easier to take somebody who understands and cares about the world and teach them tech than it is to take a technologist and teach them to care and understand about the world. So a lot of people who work at DevSeed don't necessarily come from a formal technology or GIS background. They come from public health or forestry and have found their way into technology. We have very light management, so we require people who have a lot of ownership genes and like are intrinsically motivated and work well with teams because we don't have the people to deal or to tell you what to do all the time. We are certainly looking for people who can learn well, who are good at being self-taught, because what we're working on, we assume, is going to be evolving and changing pretty regularly. We need people who are going to be able to be along for that ride. And I think like some of our best folks on the team, like really we're looking for, you'll have like kind of good taste for where things should be going, or like what is the tool that if it existed would make people's lives a lot easier, right? Like good pattern matching and taste for how to solve problems well. That would be sort of top. And then if, particularly if I'm a young coming into the field, entry level geospatial analyst or somebody who's interested in geospatial, I think what I kind of the cliche answer is lean into it and try stuff and work with the emerging tools and develop your skills that way. And that's not bad advice, but I'd say a few other things. One is I think it is really helpful to contribute to open source. I think it's something that we look for as signal in knowing who we're working with. It's a good way to be part of a community and learn from that community, including some very skilled people who've been in this for a while, who you would then have access to. So I think that's never a bad suggestion. And then as far as where to work, I think in times of high tech velocity, what you're looking for is some organization where their mandate is well above their current staffing. And that could be a startup. I found that in my first job at an NGO where the mandate was so much bigger than what that team is capable of. Because what that allows you is when you see opportunities, when you see something you could make better or a way to apply a new tool that you just learned about, you're going to be allowed to run wild, right? Like go into an organization that's going to allow you to pick up and start working on new things that somebody just needs to run with because there's so much work and not enough people, and not a place where you're going to be constrained into a particular bucket. These times are really precious. And I think if like finding yourself in an organization like that in a moment like this will do more for your career than almost anything else you can be doing right now.
I really appreciate that. So I've often thought of this or encouraged people to be really entrepreneurial in their mindset. So if you're working in an organization, actively look for things to do, to fix the broken things. What can I do? How can I apply this thing there? But having that mindset in an organization that's not shaped for that, that's an uphill battle.
That's a recipe for frustration, right? From you and the people around you.
Yeah.
Right? So, yeah.
Exactly. So I appreciate you sort of adding that extra piece to the puzzle there, because that makes a ton of sense. Maybe we should make some kind of list of go and work at these organizations.
And I think that's the common thing is like an organization that's flexible, but also their mandate is so much bigger than their team at the moment, right? That's really a good signal of a place where you're going to be able to create opportunities for yourself and rise to the level of your like skills and interests and ambition.
Ian Schuler, the CEO at Development Seed, thank you very much. This has been a fascinating conversation. I really, really appreciate your time.
And thank you so much for what you do for our community. This is really great. I appreciate you as well.